Welcome to the Supply Team 6 podcast, where we unpack real-world disruptions and what they mean for supply chains. I'm Andrew, your host. Today, we're talking about a cyber attack that brought Jaguar Land Rover's production to a standstill and what it teaches us about resilience. Joining me today are Zach, who's going to walk us through the article and how that happened, Melissa, who will connect this to supply chain principles, Scott, who will share other examples of cyber attacks hitting supply chains. So let's dive in. So Zach, here's the short version, and feel free to cut me off if I'm wrong here, as you've been diving into the story and these issues. So Jaguar Land Rover shut down IT and manufacturing systems to contain a cyber incident. The controlled restart took weeks, costing them about $50 to $70 million per week, and idling output that typically averages around 1,000 vehicles per day. Dealers struggled to register and deliver cars, and suppliers, especially the small Tier 2 and Tier 3 firms, faced real cash flow pressures. And it's not just auto. So this year, UK retailers like Marks and Spencer, the Cooperative Group, and the department store Harrods faced cyber incidents. So the National Cybersecurity Center urged companies to really tighten up their multi-factor authentication, monitor their risky logins, and harden up their help desk flows. So all those are just practical controls that matter in supply chain portals too. So let me just ask, going back to this Land Rover issue, when things do go wrong or a cyber attack happens causing production to be down for weeks, what are the first operational ripples you manage?
Yeah, Andrew, it really is two buckets for me that I think of when these production shutdowns happen. So first is just to kind of go back to the root of the issues that lead to these shutdowns. And typically what we find the main culprit to be is the fragileness of JIT or just-in-time supply chain systems. So just going back to that Jaguar Land Rover JLR case, for example, that you were discussing in the beginning, this is unfortunately nothing new in the automotive industry. As these manufacturers rely on these complex JIT networks and systems, any disruption, big or small, can cause this ripple you mentioned in your question that can strike at any moment. And what I don't think people, or even worse, operations managers and higher level employees realize is the scale of what these disruptions can be. So Andrew, you mentioned how much money was lost per week, but let's look at the employment side of this. I mean, because of the cyber attack, not only are direct employees of Jaguar Land Rover directly impacted, which is somewhere in the 30,000 ballpark range, but then there's also JLR suppliers and their people and their companies. The sunroof supplier of JLR is now laying off workers. There was another report where another supplier is now struggling and laying off upwards of 40 people. So these production shutdowns create a snowball effect, not just for the company directly, but everything that the company touches, which mainly includes their suppliers. And unfortunately for these businesses to succeed, they're heavily dependent on Jaguar Land Rover. So it's unfortunate to see what can happen due to the vulnerability of these supply chain systems when things go abrupt. And secondly, and just the other bucket that is important to reiterate and understand is that this restart isn't just a light switch. Everything changes from your processes and systems to what you are. I mean, you name it. It's not just going back to business like nothing happened. So that stretches the time to recover well beyond the moment IT just says, okay, we're good, restart is ready. And I think that's a big misconception in these shutdowns as well. So while it is a controlled restart approach, like you said, it just takes time. You have to clean and validate every single system before bringing it back online.
Interesting. So even after the threat is contained, the recovery is slow. So what I understand from this is that it means these JIT systems being lean helps until it doesn't. So how do you prepare for this or counter it? Is there just no avoiding it?
Yeah, I mean, there's always preventative measures that can be taken, right? But now avoiding it is possible to avoid things by having just the correct systems and disciplines in place within your workflow and structure. But abruptions, issues, bottlenecks, delays, injuries, anything you can think of, at some point they become inevitable, right? So it's much more important about how resilient and responsive you are rather than banking on these systems you have and just hoping for it to never crash. That's when trouble happens. So it is important that the operations team communicates with every department so everyone understands what these contingency plans are. So when something does go wrong, it doesn't go from bad to worse. And along with that, safety stock is always going to be at the forefront of any issue, even cyber attacks included. So unfortunately, in this JLR case, it's a wake-up call as it's had such a massive economic impact. And it should raise a lot of alarms and questions about just how crippling these cyber attacks can be, and especially on this industry in which many manufacturers and companies operate in a similar fashion.
Thanks, Zach. So Melissa, let's connect this to some supply chain concepts. What stands out to you?
Several things. First, lean versus resilience, or efficiency versus responsiveness. JLR runs lean, which is great for efficiency, but it means no buffers when systems fail. Second, SCOR Model dependencies. A company's ability to plan, source, make, and deliver now all rely on information systems and data transferring accurately and reliably down the supply chain. If EDI or MES goes down, you can't schedule, trace, or ship. Finally, third-party risk. Suppliers didn't cause the attack, but they paid the price. That's why cyber resilience isn't just an IT issue, it's a supply chain capability.
Great points. So let's keep going on that lean versus resilience idea. So if you were advising JLR, what would you suggest to them?
I'd recommend building degraded modes, the option for manual processes or offline backups for most critical steps. Also, cyber safety stock, like pre-kitted modules or pre-staged firmware images, so you can keep some flow going during an outage.
Interesting. So resilience doesn't mean abandoning lean, it means planning for the future.
Exactly. It's about balancing efficiency with recovery capability.
And what about supplier risk? How do you manage that?
Contracts should include incident SLAs, like recovery time objectives, and require suppliers to test their cyber controls. It's not enough to have a PDF policy. You need evidence and drills.
So Scott, this isn't an isolated case, right? What other incidents come to mind?
Yeah, so in just the last 5 years, there have been a lot of examples just around the world. So Asahi, a beverage company in Japan, had 30 domestic breweries and distribution centers affected. JBS, a global meat supplier, experienced ransomware attack. It forced shutdowns in several slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants in North America and Australia. You already mentioned Mark and Spencer in England. It's a major retailer. And even Foxconn, the electronics manufacturer, were affected by cyber attacks in Mexico. Even a water treatment center in Tipton, Indiana, just recently had a cyber attack by Russian hackers. And that was just a town of 5,000 people, but they were able to manage that quite efficiently, and they didn't have any issues with their local businesses. But if they were, then those companies would have been cut off from their water supply and their water treatment.
So whether it's cars or groceries or anything else you talked about there, the vulnerability is the same. Like digital systems really are the backbone.
Yeah, and the truth is that's what the hackers know. I mean, they're not targeting anything else. They're targeting things through, the internet, cyber theft, all things like that. So they're really trying to attack those interconnected systems where just one breach can have a ripple effect across an entire supply chain. And even those, point of sale systems are affected as well. So they're going after every aspect of the supply chain.
You think with all this going on, companies are learning from these incidents?
Yeah, I think they are for sure. And so there's continuous monitoring going on. There's fallback systems for ordering logistics. And they're even doing simulations. And so some companies are including their tier 2 and their tier 3 suppliers. But even on the other hand, one thing that you may be familiar with is what happened last year, where one of the leading cybersecurity companies in the United States caused a disruption with a faulty patch. And they're the type of people who are supposed to be protecting everyone. And so CrowdStrike had a bad patch, and that affected thousands of companies around the world and affected many supply chains. So even you have to be careful with who you choose to be your partner in protecting your company with your cybersecurity.
Awesome. Well, looks like we are running out of time, so we will wrap this up here. But just as far as our key takeaways here, cyber incidents can really halt production for weeks. Lean systems really need resilient strategies, like Melissa said, with degraded modes and recovery playbooks. And supplier risk is an operational risk. So these contracts with suppliers really include recovery SLAs and tested controls. So now we want to hear from our listeners. Does your company have a cyber disruption playbook? How long could your supply chain survive if IT went down? Have you tested a stage restart with your suppliers? The next disruption is coming. Let's get ahead of it together. We'd love to hear your strategies, so get online and share your best practices and lessons learned with us.